Okay, welcome to Psych 101, General Psychology. Today we're continuing our lecture on therapies. Okay, we talked about a lot of things last time. We talked about insight therapies, Freudian therapy, person-centered therapy, Gestalt therapy, etc. We talked about behavior therapies, classical conditioning techniques, operant conditioning techniques, and modeling. Today, we're going to talk about cognitive therapies, which are therapies based on thinking, and then we'll also get to biological therapies, which involves drugs and surgery, okay? So let's talk about cognitive therapies first. What are cognitive therapies? Whenever you see the word cognitive, it means that it has to do with thinking. So these are therapies, cognitive therapies are therapies that where they try to change the person's thinking. It's assumed that faulty beliefs about oneself, about others, faulty beliefs about the world are what actually is causing the psychological problems that people suffer from. So for instance, let's say you're suffering from depression. Well, if you're depressed, you probably have faulty beliefs about yourself. I'm no good, I'm ugly, I'm stupid, no one will ever love me, right? Faulty beliefs about others, other people will always, no one will ever love me, people will always be mean to me and will always reject me. Faulty beliefs about the world will always be unfair. The world is just, always going to hurt me and things like that. Those are illogical, faulty beliefs. None of that is actually true. It's true sometimes, it's not true all the time, okay? So we have to change those beliefs, right? We have to identify the faulty thinking and then correct it. That's what cognitive therapies seek to do. And here are some examples here we're going to talk about cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, and we're going to talk about rational emotive therapy, RET. There's many different types of cognitive therapies, just like there are many behavior therapies, just like there are many insight therapies. So let's talk about the first one. Let's talk about cognitive behavior therapy, or cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy aims to change cognitive distortions and self-defeating behaviors. Cognitive distortions, that's just faulty, illogical beliefs, distorted thoughts, right? It's not true, right? It's not correct to say that, that people will always be mean to you. That's not true. Some people will, a lot of people will not. So we need to change those distortions, those faulty ways of thinking, and that self-defeating behavior. The logic here is that faulty thinking, that illogical thinking leads to behaviors that are really bad and self-defeating. Like you might believe that people will always be mean to you, and therefore you don't talk to people and you don't try to make friends, and therefore you feel lonely and miserable and continue to feel depressed. That's an example of how the faulty thinking, the cognitive distortions lead to the self-defeating behaviors. Cognitive behavioral therapy uses what's called the ABC model. A is for action, right? Sometimes called the activating event. You have to figure out what is the event, what is the thing that happened, okay? And then the belief, what is the belief that resulted from the event? And C, what are the consequences of this belief? What are the consequences, after that belief? And we're gonna go through an example in a moment, but that's the ABC model, right? A is for action, which is really the thing that happened. B is the belief, and C is the consequence. One leads to the other. Here's an example for you guys. Let's say, starting on the upper left, right? Let's say you fail a test, right? You failed the test, right? That's the action. That's the A, right? That's the activating event. That's the action. That's the thing that happened. And then B is the belief, that what results afterward is the belief, the internal belief, right? The belief might be, I'm worthless, I'm stupid, right? And then that leads to the consequence. The consequence is feeling depressed, being miserable. Okay, that's an example of the ABC model. Another possibility, a healthier possibility, is, for starting at the lower left, is that you fail the test, and that leads to the belief, I'm smart, but I didn't study for the test. I can do better. I can do better, right? I just need to try. And that leads to no depression, a different consequence. That's a healthier result. See an example there of basically of the ABC model, right? How the event leads to the belief, and the belief leads to then the problem, the self-defeating behavior, in this case, depression. If we can change that, we can change, the result. And so you won't feel so depressed. Here's another example for you guys. Okay. Another example of cognitive behavioral therapy. It says John was dancing with a woman at a party. He was turned down. He was turned down after asking her for her phone number. Mute you guys again. I saw some, I heard some background noise. I guess I should mute you guys after I take away your ability to unmute yourself. Okay. So John was dancing with a woman at a party. He was turned down after asking for her phone number. Okay. He was dancing with her, having a good time, and then came the end of the evening, and he said, hey, can I have your number? I'd like to see you again and stuff like that. And she said no, right? John is surprised. He thought things were going well, right? He walks off, and then John, tells himself he's a loser. He says that he's ugly, that he has no game, so to speak. John gets depressed and decides not to go to another party, which starts the cycle that keeps him depressed. Notice, right? He was dancing with someone, having a good time. He asked for her phone number. She said no. He was surprised, like, what the heck is this? I thought we were doing okay. I thought this was going to lead to something. And so he thinks he's a loser. He thinks he's ugly, and doesn't want to go out anymore, and just basically feels depressed and stays depressed. Because he doesn't go out, he doesn't put himself out there, he doesn't try, he's going to continue to feel depressed. He's not going to meet anyone. Okay? He's not going to learn otherwise. Another example, a healthier example, is this. Joe was dancing with a woman at a party. And he too was turned down after asking for her phone number. Joe is surprised. He thought things were going well. Joe, on the other hand, tells himself that maybe he had bad breath, right? So he goes out, buys himself a new toothbrush, goes to another party, and meets somebody new. Notice, Joe had the same thing happen to him, but Joe, instead of blaming himself and saying that he's ugly and stupid and that kind of stuff and a loser, Joe instead thought that maybe there's something, right? Maybe I didn't brush my teeth very well, I had bad breath, and when I got close, she noticed my bad breath and therefore rejected me, or something else, right? And therefore, Joe believes something different, right? Something healthier, that there was something that went wrong somewhere in there, right? Something about the situation, not really something about him. And so therefore he, tries again, with a slightly different approach, and basically is more likely to have success later. Here's the thing: if you are depressed and things are going badly, it doesn't mean that things are always going to go that well. I mean, that way, I should say, right? You have to keep trying, put yourself out there, keep going out. Eventually you'll meet someone. Eventually you'll start passing your classes. Eventually things will get better about work. You just have to keep trying. When you give up, that is when things go really bad. You feel miserable, depressed, so you feel like giving up. And when then you give up, you have no chance of getting better. Okay. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches you to change your thinking so that there's a different consequence. Okay. And in this case, the thinking was that, hey, maybe I had bad breath or something else went wrong. It's not really that I'm a loser or that I'm awful. It's the situation. Therefore, I should just keep trying and things will get better. And this does work. I know it's happened to me. I had the same situation, dancing with some woman. I went to a club once, and I was there and I met someone, and, we danced, we laughed, we had a few drinks. I had a great time. We were together for like 4 hours at that, at the club and stuff like that. And I was thinking, yeah, this is going great. I'm going to get her phone number afterward. We're going to go out. We're probably going to become a thing, boyfriend, girlfriend, like that. And that's what I was thinking, right? Having a blast with this woman. She was really into me. I was into her. And then I asked for her phone number, and, she didn't really tell me she didn't want to give me her phone number. She gave me a phone number, but it was a fake one. She gave me a fake phone number. The same thing happened to me. Okay. And I too, at the time, felt bummed out, thinking like, what the hell, what the hell happened? It's like, I don't understand. And I did feel all bummed out and miserable, but you know, I kept trying, putting myself out there. Eventually you meet some people, you know, things go well, you go out, whatever it is. Then things don't work out, you meet somebody else, and things don't work, you meet somebody else, and you keep trying. That's what happens. And eventually I found someone who actually, you know, I guess wanted to stay with me. And I wanted to stay with her. So, you know, eventually it worked out and we got married. Now we have kids and we're together. You know, and that's what happens. You keep trying, you know, at work, at relationships, whatever it is, and hopefully things get better. But you don't believe that you're just awful and miserable and things are never going to get better and then give up, because then you get nowhere. Let's keep going. There's another cognitive therapy called rational emotive therapy. Not much said here, but this is a therapy that, again, the therapist challenges those faulty beliefs, right? The therapist tries to change that faulty thinking, right? But the thing about this therapy is that the therapist is very confrontational. The therapist confronts you, right? And tells you how wrong you are or how dumb something is, right? The therapist tries to persuade you, uses comments, uses reason, uses logic to try to convince you. Like, for instance, let's say you're depressed and there you are in therapy and you tell the therapist something like, no one will ever love me. Nobody cares about me. That's what you say. The therapist confronts you and says, nobody loves you? Like, no, that's just wrong. Why do you say that? That's not true, right? Do you have a family? Yeah, well, I have a mom and a dad. Do they love you? Well, yeah, they love me. You have any siblings? Do they care about you? Yeah. You have any friends? Well, yeah, a few. You know, you ever met somebody before who's actually taken a liking to you? Yeah. Then why do you say nobody loves you and that no one could ever love you? That's just wrong, right? People do care about you and people can care about you. And you will find people who will care about you. They confront you. It doesn't just work with depression. They'll try it with any psychological disorder. Let's say they're dealing with someone who's schizophrenic. And the schizophrenic person says, you know, hey, man, I hear voices. There's people, you know, these voices, these people, you know. The therapist will confront them, say, what voices? I don't hear anybody. Where are these voices you're talking about? I don't hear them. Where are these voices? Where are these people that you're talking about? Right? Confront that person. Or someone who's really paranoid might say something like, and it could be a schizophrenic too who's really paranoid, or someone who just has paranoid personality disorder might say something like, man, people are out to get me. People are trying to kill me, man, or whatever it is, you know. And the therapist says, where are these people? Where are they? I don't see anybody here. Somebody's hiding under the desk. Who's trying to get you? Where's this person trying to get you? Are they looking at you right now? Right? You confront them. You need to confront people. Okay? They will confront people about their delusions, okay? About things they believe that just aren't so. Beliefs that are wrong. All kinds of things like that. Okay? They're very kind of mean about it sometimes. You know, it's like they really confront you. They really let you have it. If you have, let's say, arachnophobia, which is a fear of spiders, let's say you have that phobia, you're afraid of spiders. So you're afraid of spiders, right? And the person says, yeah, I'm afraid of spiders. Like, what's there to be afraid of? You're afraid of those tiny little things that you can just step on and squish? That's what you're afraid of? Yeah, man, they're they're poisonous. They can sting me, man. It's like, these spiders, they're just waiting for you to pass by and they're just gonna jump on you and sting you. It's just dumb. That's not gonna happen. They're not waiting for you. Use reason, use logic, right? They'll say things like, do you know that most spiders' fangs aren't even big enough to penetrate the skin? There's only a few spiders that have fangs that are big enough to penetrate the skin. Most of them can't even hurt you. And you see how you confront them and you make it seem silly what they're saying, or you make it seem wrong, right? You really confront them about these beliefs. That's rational emotive therapy. That's why it's called rational, because they confront the illogical beliefs, but also emotive because they get at the emotion, right? They really get at you. They confront you, right? And that's why it's called rational emotive therapy, or RET. When you see it on your exam, if you see RET, that's what it is. There's also group therapy. Group therapy, for some reason, that was not on the outline, but Actually, it was, but the outline was the last video. We're also going to talk about group therapy today. Sometimes therapy is done in groups. Okay. Usually therapy just involves the person who's being treated and the therapist. That's not a group. That's called a dyad. With a group, you need at least one other person. So at least 3 people. 3 people or more is a group. So one form of group therapy is family therapy, when you treat the whole family. Okay. That means that there's a therapist, the husband and the wife, and probably some kids. There's also couples therapy, which I'll talk about in a moment. That's also group therapy because it's husband, wife, and therapist, 3 or more, right? But family therapy is, they treat the whole family, because often when there's problems at home, if one person has a problem, that means everyone has a problem because you're a part of a family, okay? And I'll just tell you a little bit about family therapy. The primary goals of family therapy are to improve communication. That's often one of the main problems. That is the key to improve communication. You'd be surprised how often people just assume things without asking. They just assume things and then they get mad at each other. There's not enough communication, let's say, with the parents and the kids, or the kids with each other, or the husband and wife don't talk about something. Okay? That's a big problem, right? We need to learn to communicate better with one another. And it's not just about not saying things. Sometimes it's about how we say things, and we say things in a way that's really rude and really mean when we shouldn't say it that way. Or we say something and the other person interprets it the wrong way. The big issue there is usually communication. We have to learn to talk to one another and talk to each other the right way. Another goal of family therapy is to increase empathy. Empathy is when you basically understand what the other person is going through. It's not the same thing as sympathy. Sympathy is when you feel bad for them. Empathy is when you understand what they're feeling. We need to increase empathy, right? We need to have people understand what the other person is feeling, what the other person is going through. And when they do that, they're more likely to treat each other better. Now, I'll talk about an empathy technique in a moment when we get to couples therapy, but I'll save it for that. But it's also done in family therapy. Increased sharing of responsibilities. Often there'll be a lot of problems within families because things aren't fair. Okay? What usually is happening is that the wife is doing too much. She goes to work, she comes home, and she's expected to clean and cook and look after the kids, while the husband, he goes to work, comes home, and then sits on the couch and has a beer. And there he's asking, hey, when's dinner ready? Is it dinner time yet? I'm hungry, right? You think that's fair, right? It's not fair. And then the kids are just running around like animals. That's going to cause some problems, right? It's not fair. The husband isn't pulling his weight. The wife's doing too much, and the kids are just destroying the place, right? That often happens a lot. You have to share responsibilities. Guess what? The husband has to get off his butt and has to help out. He has to help out with something. The cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, something. Okay? She can't be doing it all. They both work, for instance. And she has a job too. If he has extra time, then he needs to do extra things. Okay? And you need to help each other out. The kids, guess what? They need to have responsibilities too. They need to pick up after themselves. They need to do things on their own. They need to help out. Even if they're just 5, 7 years old, they can help out. They can pick up their toys, organize, put things in a basket, things like that. They can help out. You need to teach them to help. And especially if they're teenagers, they better be helping. Can't just be sitting there, right, watching TV, playing video games, and doing nothing and just creating a mess or just expecting everything to be done for them. They have to learn to be responsible. They need to learn things. They need to learn how to clean, how to cook, how to do yard work, all those bunch of things. Those are all helpful skills. They're going to need them when they grow up and get older. So you need to share those responsibilities and ultimately reduce that family conflict. If you do all those things, improve communication, increase empathy, make it so things are more fair, and you share the responsibilities and the burden, okay, then things will get better. But it's a lot easier said than done, by the way. I have problems in my own family, right? I mean, I do. It's just the way it is. It's hard to raise kids. It's hard to be married and have kids and have everything work out. Okay. And by the way, I also want to tell you guys, we're just describing family therapy here in general. There are many different kinds of family therapy, but we're not getting into that because that would be for a more advanced class. Another form of group therapy is couples therapy. Couples therapy is Very interesting. And just like with family therapy, there are many types of couples therapy. But I'm going to talk about couples therapy in general. Again, with couples therapy, you want to improve communication, improve those expectations. Here's the thing: when you're a couple, you have to have, you have to know how to communicate, right? People, like I said, are often rude, they're mean, or they don't communicate things at all, and then you have problems. You need to learn to communicate and to be nice and courteous and all that stuff. And a lot of us didn't learn that. Okay, so we don't know how to do that. I grew up in a family where it was like pendejo this, pendejo that, cabrón, all this stuff. And that's not the way you talk to people. When you get older, and you find someone, you're with someone, you probably know better. You know not to call them pendejo and all this stuff, or cabrón, but you're nicer, okay? You're nicer at the beginning, but then what happens when you've been together for a long time, that's when the real you comes out. And then you start being mean and rude, and you start being the way you really are. And then that's when the problems start, when the honeymoon period is over, right? Because at the beginning, you do anything for each other, and you're so nice and sweet at the beginning. When you've been together for a long time, you are no longer that way. Then you become the real you. And the real you is not as good as that person they met at the beginning, okay? You need to have the right expectations about people as well, about relationships. Relationships are hard. That's the truth. We all want them. We want people to love us and be with us. We want to get married and all this stuff, but it's hard. It really is. It's easy at the beginning, like I said, because you love each other, do anything for each other. I remember I was there, right? My wife was wonderful. I was wonderful to her. You should see us now, right? You should see, right? It's not the same, okay? But you need to improve those expectations. And you know what? Here's another thing about expectations. Don't expect that you're going to be able to change him or her. Do not expect that. Don't try that. Don't try to change people. People don't really change. If you don't like who you're with, you shouldn't be with them. You're not going to change them. Guess what? That bad boy that you're into, he's still going to be a badass, a bad boy later on. Cheating on you now, he's going to be cheating on you later. Doesn't treat you well now, he's not going to treat you well later. People don't really change. Not that much. Most people don't. Some people do. Some people have an awakening, so to speak, and they change. Most people do not. You need to have the right expectations. If you have a cabrón, that you're married to or you're in a relationship with, hey, that's who you have, right? If you have someone who's nice and sweet, well, then that's who you have. But, know that they're not always going to be that way. You need to have the right expectations. Have the right expectations about marriage. Marriage is hard. It's hard to stay with the same person day after day, week after week, month after month, especially when you're married and you live with them and you have kids. It's really hard. And some days you feel like getting the hell out of there. You know their looks, you love the way they look when they're young. Guess what? They're not going to look that way when they're older. No way, not even close. You better have something else other than looks keeping you together, okay? Other than the physical stuff. Marriage is hard. Life is hard, okay? It's hard to be with somebody year after year, especially if you get married and stuff like that, right? It's not like the way it is in the fairy tales. It's not like, the princess met her prince and they got married and lived happily ever after. No, it's they meet each other, they got married, right? They're happy for a while and then they have problems and those problems continue, okay? And the kids drive you nuts and it's hard. And then eventually the kids grow up and move out of the house and then you're happier again, okay? Or maybe not. Maybe you get divorced. That's what happens a lot, okay? You need to know the right thing about relationships. It's not easy, okay? And here's a way to improve communication with couples, something called empathy training. Remember, empathy is when you understand what the other person is going through. There are these techniques to try to increase empathy. One of them called empathy training. Sounds simple, but it's harder in practice. With empathy training, one person speaks. Let's say the wife speaks. The other person listens and tries to repeat what was said. So the husband listens there and repeats what she just said. So maybe she says, it's like, you don't listen to me. All right. He has to listen to that and repeat. What did she just say? Maybe she said that I feel like you don't love me. I feel like you don't care about me anymore. It often means a lot more than what was said. You need to learn to really listen and understand what's being said. Or maybe it's his turn to speak and he says, hey, you know what? This weekend, I'm going to go with my buddies, just me and my buddies. No women, right? So I'm not taking you. What did he just say, right? She was listening to that. What did he just say? And she could say, what he's really saying is that he doesn't think I'm good enough for his friends. He's really saying he doesn't want to be with me, that he doesn't care for me. Maybe that is what he's saying. Or maybe he's saying that he just wants to go out with his friends. Maybe that's all it means. Sometimes it's something simple and sometimes it's more complicated. You need to learn to listen. You need to learn to understand. That's empathy training. Try some role playing too. They often do some role playing. Role playing is when you just switch roles, right? Let the husband try acting like the wife for a while. Let him try to, do the cooking and the cleaning or whatever she does, right? Doesn't have to be stereotypical. And let her try to basically do the yard work. Maybe that's what he's doing, and maintain the cars, right? And see how they feel afterward. What usually happens is that they find out that the other person has it a lot harder than they thought they did. And they learn to appreciate each other and to understand each other. My wife thinks I don't do anything, right? Because she does the indoor stuff. What do? Well, I maintain the cars, stuff like that. Whenever something needs to be done, I'm the one who takes care of both cars. But I also do the yard work, right? I take out the trash, I rake and I sweep, and we have a pool, and I clean that stupid pool every single day. Every single day, I'm there for a half hour, an hour. Today it's really windy, so that thing is getting dirty every minute, right? Every single day, I keep that pool clean. She doesn't do that. She thinks I don't do anything. Let her try it for a week. Okay, every morning, get up, clean that pool, maintain the chemicals, do all that stuff. I had a pool man, by the way, but I got rid of him because he wasn't good, okay? Anyway, so let her try that, and then she'll have an appreciation. Or let her go and take the cars to the shop and negotiate and deal with those people who try to rip you off, right? It's not as easy as you think. You need to learn to appreciate each other, right? Switch roles, right? Try doing each other's job, so to speak, and see what happens, okay? Working together on chores, right? Helping each other out. Work together. Help each other with the cooking, with the cleaning. Help each other with the yard work rather than separating it, right? Exchanging caring actions. Hey, next time you go shopping, why don't you get something for him? Or next time he goes somewhere, right? Bring, a bouquet of flowers or something like that. Some nice things every now and then that aren't expected, right? And you'll see that things will get a lot better. But it's hard to be in relationships. It's really hard to be married. It's hard to raise a family. And even when you're just a couple, even without kids, it's hard. And there are many forms of couples therapy. Okay, there's other kinds of therapies that you may have heard about. Self-help, like self-help groups. There are group therapies where there's often no therapist. Self-help groups are where people get together. People who share a common problem get together and they provide social support for one another. An example is Alcoholics Anonymous. A bunch of alcoholics get together. It could be at somebody's house, or it could be at some other place, some warehouse somewhere, or somewhere where they meet. And often with these self-help groups, sometimes they're free. Sometimes there might be a membership fee, a monthly membership fee, and it's not that much. It might be $30, $50, something like that. Not much, okay? Or maybe even less. Often they're free. And you get together, people who have a common problem, and they talk. And they're there for each other. They support each other. Alcoholics get together and talk about their problems, right? This can actually be very helpful, because often when you're suffering, when you're an alcoholic, or maybe you're depressed, or you're this or that, right? You often feel like you're the only one. You often feel that no one has it as bad as you do. Join a self-help group and you'll realize you're not the only one. And that makes you feel a lot better. And you talk to people who understand you. There are people doing better than you who give you hope. There are people doing worse than you who make you feel like it's really not that bad. And you're there for each other. That's the power of social support. It's very helpful. I'll tell you, in general, it's helpful to have people who are there for you. Whether it's a church or a group of friends, it feels better when people have your back, so to speak. A lot of people don't have that, but it's often even better to join a self-help group where people really understand you, where they're going through the same thing. Often there's no therapist. There's just maybe a facilitator, someone who kind of helps guide the sessions. And that facilitator may be someone who was also an alcoholic, someone who's also in the group therapy, who's just volunteered to take that role. And people take roles and they empower each other and they help each other. And here's the thing, just about anything that people suffer from, there's probably a self-help groups. Self-help group. There's Alcoholics Anonymous. There's also support groups for self-help groups for people who are depressed, people who are schizophrenic, people who are being physically abused, people who've been sexually abused, people who've lost loved ones. For just about anything, there's self-help groups. And those are some group therapies. But now let's talk about other kinds of treatments. There are also biological treatments. There's not just therapy, there's also drugs and surgery. Biological treatments are meant to basically deal directly with the biology. They're often used when other treatments fail. So maybe the psychotherapy didn't work, maybe the group therapy didn't work. Maybe it's time to try some drugs. And by that, I mean legal drugs, okay? Or maybe something else didn't work and maybe you need to try surgery. There's surgeries being developed as well to help treat certain conditions, okay? So it's often used when other treatments fail. Sometimes they're used with or instead of therapy, like drug therapy is often combined with psychotherapy. And research shows that when you combine drugs with therapy, that works better than drugs by themselves and better than therapy by itself. Biological treatments can include medication, drugs basically. It could include psychosurgery, which is just surgery. Something new called deep brain stimulation, which is kind of like surgery. Electricconvulsive therapy, which is old, and I'll talk about it in a moment, okay? But there are other alternatives where they try to deal with the biology and not so much the thoughts, not so much the behavior, it's just the biology. And by the way, that's often what your insurance will cover. Insurance will often cover drugs, but it's not going to cover 3 to 5 years of therapy, of psychotherapy. Okay? So sometimes that's what people get. Medication, there's many kinds, and these are just some examples. And there's drugs that fall into different classes. There's antipsychotic drugs like Haldol, Mellaril, Proloxin, Thorazine, and many others. There's many other antipsychotic drugs. They're always coming up with newer and newer drugs, okay? Antipsychotic drugs, as the name implies, help alleviate auditory and visual hallucinations. So those that are schizophrenic, who hear voices and who see things, these drugs help get rid of those hallucinations. But they have to stay on the drugs. If they get off the drugs, the hallucinations come back. So these help you stay in touch with reality. It's good for those who are psychotic, delusional, schizophrenic, paranoid, that kind of stuff, okay? There's also atypical antipsychotic. These are just newer antipsychotic, like Abilify, Risperdal, Chlorozil, and again, they're developing new ones all the time. These antipsychotics don't just help alleviate hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations, but they also treat the negative symptoms, like withdrawal and apathy. Let me explain that. Schizophrenics will often have what we call negative symptoms. Negative symptoms are normal behaviors that are missing. Positive symptoms are abnormal behaviors that are there, like hallucinations. Negative symptoms are things that should be there, like social interaction, things like that, speech, whatever it is, things that should be there but are not there, that are missing. These drugs help bring those things back, those normal behaviors. They're on these drugs and they're better able to interact with people, right? Better able to talk to people. Apathy is basically when you don't care, right? That shouldn't be the way you behave, right? These drugs help you care a bit more and be a bit more involved. Other drugs, there's also, things like Ritalin, Adderall that are used to treat ADHD. Ritalin is the older drug, okay? Adderall is newer. Both of them are psychostimulants. They stimulate the front part of the brain that helps you focus and pay attention. Adderall is the newer drug. And I will tell you also that there are people who are abusing Adderall, people who want to take advantage of that drug and just use it to do better in school, to help them study longer because it helps you focus. And in some people, they find out that it can give them an advantage in school. It can make you seem like you're smarter. It's not really making you smarter. It's helping you focus. And if you don't need these drugs, you shouldn't be taking them. I've known people who have abused these drugs. One person said that he took Adderall so that he could study because in college he needed to basically, stay up all night studying. So he took Adderall and yeah, he could focus, but he couldn't study because he kept just like focusing on the same thing, and he would try to turn the page and he'd come back. It made him feel like he had OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I guess it made him focus too much. It's for those who have difficulty with those things, difficulty focusing, difficulty controlling their behavior. There are also antidepressants, Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, Effexor, and many, many more newer ones being developed all the time. That's a thing. A lot of pharmaceutical companies developing new drugs all the time. Antidepressants help alleviate depression and anxiety. And that's good because depression and anxiety often go together. There's many different kinds, and some work the same way and some are different in how they work, but they all help alleviate depression. There's also lithium, Depakote, Lamictal, Tegretol that are used to alleviate symptoms of bipolar disorder. Lithium is the one that, the older one. It's a lithium salt tablet. It's a pill basically that you take. It's very toxic. Lithium, if you know about chemistry, you know the periodic table of elements, lithium is actually a metalloid. Basically, it's a thing that's like a metal. It's the same thing that's used in batteries, in lithium-ion batteries. It's a lithium salt, lithium carbonate. They combine it with carbon. They create this pill that you take. Very toxic. It helps to seem to alleviate the bipolar symptoms, but it also makes you very nauseous and can make you feel really awful. There's other drugs, Depakote, Lamictal, Tegretol. I don't know enough about those, but there's newer drugs that might work better. The good news is that there's so many drugs that if one doesn't work on you or you can't tolerate the side effects of one drug, there's probably one that will be better. Okay. There's also surgery. Psychosurgery is brain surgery. Now, I don't recommend surgery, okay? But psychosurgery has a history, okay? The prefrontal lobotomy, if you've heard about that, that's something that's kind of old, developed, I think, in the 50s. The prefrontal lobotomy, what they would do is they would drill holes in your skull and carve out or scrape away part of your brain. So let's say you were really aggressive or schizophrenic or whatever it is, depressed, and somebody developed this method, some doctor, called the prefrontal lobotomy, where he, drill holes in your skull and carve away part of the, front part of the brain. And then after that, you're basically sitting on the couch watching TV, and that's all you do. You don't want to do anything else. And the doctor would say, look, he's all better. He's not aggressive anymore. He's not having the hallucinations. He's not acting all crazy, right? He was actually destroying the person's brain, turning the person basically into a zombie, into a vegetable, so to speak. Can have permanent side effects, of course. Rarely, if ever, used today. The lobotomy, you give somebody lobotomy today, they'll throw your ass in jail. That's just not allowed. But the person who developed the lobotomy won the Nobel Prize in medicine. They thought it was a wonderful thing back in the 50s, just like they thought a lot of things were wonderful in the 50s. And we know better now that it wasn't so wonderful, by the way, in many ways. But they thought this thing was wonderful. No, it's not. It's a horrible thing. But the person won the Nobel Prize in medicine. Now we know that it's just destroying the person's brain and personality. That's what it's doing. There are newer methods that are not like so awful. There's something called deep brain stimulation, because we know a lot more about the brain nowadays. With deep brain stimulation, they implant electrodes, tiny wires in your brain. And these electrodes emit tiny electrical signals that silence, quote, silence abnormal signals that may be causing abnormal behavior. So here's the thing, your brain is always sending signals back and forth. Certain parts of the brain are communicating with others. And depression, schizophrenia, whatever it is, probably has a pattern of signals that's going back and forth. With these electrical signals, with these deep brain stimulation, they generate other electrical signals that kind of counteract those. and basically reduce those other electrical signals or silence them. And then the person behaves more normally. This is a newer thing, more experimental. It hasn't been approved yet for widespread use. But it's, based on what I read, it could be used to treat Parkinson's, which is a movement disorder, tremors, Tourette's, post-traumatic stress disorder, Alzheimer's, obsessive compulsive disorder, major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, borderline personality disorder, for a variety of things. And that's what usually happens when they come up with something new. They get all excited and say, oh, this could be used for this, this, or that. And they start thinking of all these possibilities. And later on, they might find out that doesn't really work at all. Or maybe it doesn't work as well as they thought, just like with the prefrontal lobotomy. But it's something new. There's all kinds of other things. There's other techniques where they could put electrodes in your brain as well. And those electrodes are connected to a button. And whenever you're feeling depressed, you press that button and stimulate your brain, and then you feel better. In the future, if there are such things, I'm sure it'll be wireless. You'll probably have an app on your phone. You're feeling depressed, right? Open that app, press that button there. Your brain will get some stimulation, and you'll probably feel better. There'll probably be treatments like that in the future. I don't know if it'll be within my lifetime or even your lifetime, but as you know, things are changing and technology advances very, very quickly. If you knew about Neuralink, that thing that Elon Musk is kind of working on developing along with other people, that's something new as well that he thinks is going to show great promise. They could probably treat all kinds of psychological disorders with it and also just enhance the brain. And maybe in the future, we will have cyborgs, right? People who are part machine and, and part human. Who knows, right? We've been thinking about that in science fiction for a long time, but there are these experimental methods. I wouldn't recommend them. I wouldn't suggest you try them, by the way, but they are experimental and they might exist in the future. I can't show you the CD there because it doesn't really work. You could look up a YouTube video on electroconvulsive therapy. And when we're in class, face to face, that's what I would do. I'd open up a YouTube link and click on it and show you the video. But it doesn't work too well in Zoom for some reason. Some of you have complained about the audio. But electroconvulsive therapy, also known as ECT, is basically when they shock your brain. They run an electric current through your brain. They hook you up to certain wires, right? And then they shock the hell out of you. It's like a Dr. Frankenstein kind of thing. They shock your brain. It produces a seizure, right? Your body starts, twitching and jumping up and down. And, it's like they're shocking the hell out of you. It's been used as a last resort for severe, prolonged depression. It's been used for other things as well, like schizophrenia and other things. Back in the 50s, they did all kinds of crazy things. This is another one of those outdated, dangerous things. It can produce memory impairments. It has been known to wipe out entire memories. You get this several times. And then for some people, they have found afterward that they don't even remember who their husband or wife is anymore. They don't remember their children, right? They're just shocking you, right? Disrupting the electrical signals that are sent in the brain, causing a seizure, basically. Doing this over and over again with many treatments, by the way. Not recommended, not really done today. They might do it in some countries where they don't know better, right? Or just to torture people, right? But not recommended. And well, we just have a reference of something I cited. That's it, you guys. So I will stop recording